We're going to go ahead and talk about floating elements. Floating elements is a great way that you can arrange your content and make it look much more interesting. Normally, HTML and XML information flows from the top of the browser window down to the bottom. So you can see that that's illustrated in this page right here. I have an H1 tag, I have an image, an H3, and a paragraph, and then that just repeats itself as it goes down. So here's our page on hot peppers. Basically, one headline, one paragraph, or one block level element just stacks on top of one another. It's more like a word processor like display, and essentially it's pretty boring. So with CSS, you certainly are not stuck with this at all, and you'll learn lots of new methods for arranging items on a web page, and as we get more advanced, you can do a lot more things utilizing floats. So the float property basically moves an element to either the left or the right, and in the process of moving that element, the content below the floated element either moves up or wraps around the float. Floating elements is a great way to move supplemental information out of the way from the main text. So if you wanted to have some call out text, or if you want to be able to control the positioning of images, or if you want to have text wrap around images, you can do all of these things utilizing floats. You can also go ahead and create things like sidebars or related links or something that go to one side of your web browser instead of just stacking on top of each other. And you basically have a lot of control of positioning elements and moving it out of the normal flow of the document. Elements that follow a floated element will sit next to the floated element if there is room. So floating is kind of a dynamic relative positioning, if you will. The behavior is predetermined and all you have to do is basically invoke it. So let's kind of see how this works. We're going to be utilizing this page that talks about hot peppers. And if we look at our code, you can see that this page is set up very simply. It starts with the H1 tag. It is followed by an image tag, an H3, and then paragraph tags. And that just repeats itself for the three picture paragraph pairings that we're using in this example. So what I'd like to do to begin with, of course, is to just go ahead and create some CSS styles. I'm going to go ahead and start by using my universal selector, and I'm just going to set my margin and padding to 0 right off the bat. So we'll go ahead and set our margin to 0 and our padding to 0 as well. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set a couple styles on our body. I'm going to globally change the color of my font and control the font family. So we've done all those things before. I'm going to go ahead and specify font family, and I'll use Verdana. And if that's not available, I'll request a sans serif font. I'm going to go ahead and specify that my color be set to 930, which is red. And I'm going to go ahead and set the width of the body to 600 pixels. So everything doesn't get too wide. So if we just save and refresh, you can see that this is what my page looks like now. Now what I'm going to do is going to go ahead and create some styles for some of the tags in here so this looks a little bit better. I don't want everything all slammed into the left-hand corner and the top-hand corner. So we'll actually just go ahead and control those things on the individual tags themselves. Let's begin by styling our H1 tag. So I'm going to go ahead and set the H1 tag. I want to set the font size for H1. And I'm going to use M's for this example, so I'm going to use 1.2 M's. I am going to go ahead and put a border bottom. Let's just set a border bottom. And on the border bottom, we will go ahead and set the font to a dashed 1 pixel. And my color is going to be the same reddish color that I used above, so 930. And the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to set a little bit of margin. So I'm going to go ahead and set margins on the top, and my margin top is going to be set to 1em. I'll go ahead and set the margin on the left, and that also is going to be 1em, and finally I'll set the margin on the bottom, and again I'm going to use 1em for that setting. So let's go ahead and save and refresh, and we should now notice that our head 1 tag is pushed left and top. It has a little dashed line and it has some color on it, so that looks a little bit better. Now obviously the rest of my text looks very large in relation, so let's go ahead and set some styles for that as well. I'm going to go ahead and set a style for my H3, and all I'm going to do here is set the font size of the H3 tag, and we'll just set this to 1em. And then let's go ahead and set the paragraph style as well. So I'll go ahead and set a paragraph size of 0.75 ems. Hopefully you're getting kind of used to using the em property, since we've been using it a little bit. So we reload and the size looks better. We do need to go ahead and indent these things a little bit so that they look better, but I'm going to actually leave the indent off for now, since we are going to go ahead and create some floats which will kind of take this content out of the normal flow as I was speaking about before. So we'll just leave that. I'm not going to go ahead and set my margins on my H3 and my paragraph. Maybe I'll throw a little bit of padding into the paragraph just so it has a little bit of spacing. That'll probably improve the readability of it a little bit. So let's go ahead and set the padding on the top. And I'll go ahead and use 1em for this, and let's go ahead and set the padding on the left as well. And again, I guess I'm just feeling like I'm in a 1em move. I'm going to go ahead and use 1em again. So I'm going to reload my page, and now you can see that I have a little bit of spacing on my paragraph, which seems to improve the readability a little bit. So now let's go ahead and introduce floating. I'm going to go back and I'm going to go ahead and make a style for my image. So I'll just go ahead and put this right on the image itself. And the first thing let's do for our image is let's go ahead and let's turn on the border. So I'm going to go ahead and set a property for border. I'm just going to make a thin border, 1 pixel. I'm going to use a solid line, and I'm going to set it to a light gray value. And I'm going to go ahead and set my margin on the left to 1em. And I'm going to go ahead and set the margin on the right as well. I'll just set that to 0 right now so you can kind of see what happens, and then we'll come back and adjust that. So I'm going to save my page, and if we reload the page now, you can see the border of the image. So there's a little bit of white space around all my images, but you can see where they are positioned. They're indented from the left hand of the page because of my margin left. So now let's go ahead and add the magical float and see what happens. I'm going to come back to my image right here, and I'm going to go ahead and create the float, and I'm going to float left. So what that basically is going to do is it's going to affect the way other content interacts with this image. If I go ahead and refresh my page, you can see how now all of the other content is going to float to the left of the image. So this page isn't perfect yet. We need to fix something, but we'll do that shortly. But you can see how here's my image sitting right here on my page. My paragraph and H3 tag float to the left. Now because they're not long enough to reach the bottom of the image, the rest of the content is going to float left and then actually wrap around that image. So you can kind of see that that's happening now. Now obviously I don't want this to be appearing like it is right now because this isn't helping my situation at all. I'd like my images to kind of be on the left and my text to be on the right. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to introduce clear. And basically the clear property is going to enable you to stop elements from moving up next to a floated element. So generally when you're using the float property, you're going to be using the clear property to kind of stop the float. You want to tell a tag or some sort of element that you don't want it to be floating. So you're going to use clear to do that, and that's going to basically solve the problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my actual body copy here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a div, and I'll assign a class to my div, and I'm just going to call my class clear. And I'll go ahead, usually when you're creating divs, even if you're not going to put something in them, it's not a good idea to leave them completely empty. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a non-breaking space in there, and then I'm going to go ahead and close my div like so, and I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to put it underneath the bottom of each section of each paragraph. So as you know from what you've learned so far about adding divs to your web page, if I save my page and refresh the page in the browser, nothing's going to really happen. I get a little tiny bit of spacing there, and that's because of my non-breaking space, but I haven't solved my problem. What I need to do now is I need to go ahead and I need to assign a style to the clear class. So I'm going to go ahead and make a style for the clear class, and the style is a really simple one. It's going to be clear, and then what I want to do is I want to clear the left float, so I'll just say clear left. And now if I save and I refresh my page, you're going to see that I get this page that looks great. All of my content is now, my images are floated on the left, they stay on the left, and then my text floats kind of to the right of those images. Now I would like to add a little bit of spacing right here, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust the margin right, and I'll just add a margin right of 1em. Remember how we talked about that before? I just wanted to show you the difference. So if I refresh my page now, you can see I get a nice spacing right there. So this is perfect. This is what I wanted to do. You can see by just using a little bit of float, I mean the only things that are new in what we did was we applied the float left property to the image, which basically is going to make other content float to the left of that image, and then I cleared that left float in between the various elements so that they didn't kind of stair step and stack on top of each other. Now let me just show you what's going to happen if we have more text. All my text is basically short enough so that it doesn't, you know, come down past my image. So I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to copy, I'll go to the paragraph about habaneros, and I'm going to copy that. And then before I use my clear, I'm just going to paste that. So I'm using the same paragraph again. And if I refresh, you're going to see that this is what happens. When you float something left, it basically is going to kind of create an inline type look, where if content is, you know, going to go past that particular item that's floated, and you don't have to float images, you could float text, of course, as well. You can basically float anything, any block level element works well, and you could even float non-block level elements with a little more tweaking, and we'll talk about that later on. But you can see how my content is going to now float around the image. So this might be something that you'd like to have happen. That's perfectly fine. If we wanted to kind of keep more of our two-column type of look, then all I have to do is basically add a little bit of CSS to my paragraph tag. So let me show you that quickly. If I come back here and I come up to my P tag, and what I'm going to do on the P tag is I'm going to actually add a float of left, and let me show you what happens here. We need to add one more thing, but I'll show you. If I just add a float of left, you can see that now it kind of takes my text away from my elements, and that's not really what I want either. So what I need to do now is I need to come back here and I need to tell my paragraph that I not only want to float left, but I also want to specify a width. And let's try a width of maybe 350 pixels and see what that does. If I reload my page now, you can see how now I get these wonderful little columns that you know, stack right next to each other. So my images appear in one column, and then my text is going to appear in another column next to it. Just by adding that width of 350 and the float left kind of solves that problem. So this is kind of a mini introduction to creating, you know, a multi-column layout. Basically, without getting overly complex in this particular exercise, this is how you can set up multi-columns by using floats, and we'll be using those quite extensively as we proceed through this course. So in summary, basically what we've done here is we've floated an image, or you can float any element, and you're asking it to be pushed up as far as possible to the left or the right. You can also float things to the right. So for instance, if I come in here and I create a image float of right, and I change my clear to both, you can either clear left, right, or both, and now I have things floating on the left and the right. Let's go ahead and let's save and refresh. You can see that now I've flip-flopped what I have going on. So now my images appear in that right-hand column while my text appears in the left-hand column just by changing the float value. So that's a unique way that you can use these things as well. But anyways, when you, going back to what I was saying before, you're asking the element to be pushed as far as possible to the left or to the right of the parent element. The elements that follow the floated element in the markup are going to wrap around that element until they clear the bottom of it, and then they're going to resume their normal layout. So that's exactly what we have happening in this example.